My name is Oakley Blair, 41, Senior Infrastructure Architect. For 14 years, I built and maintained the entire digital backbone for our Seattle region. Security protocols, disaster recovery, compliance audits, and the systems that kept critical data secure and accessible. No one saw my work until something went wrong. And if it ever did, the company would hemorrhage credibility overnight. That Tuesday in conference room B felt colder than any server vault. Andrew Briggs, our regional director, stood at the head of the table, radiating the confidence of someone who believes the world bends to his titles, not his understanding. After years of quietly preventing disasters, including 2 near-catastrophic breaches, I assumed I'd be named the new infrastructure director. Instead, he announced, the individual assuming this role is Natalie Briggs. His daughter. 26. 4 months of shadowing. A recent graduate. The room exhaled in forced applause. I clapped too, controlled, deliberate. The problem wasn't Natalie. It was handing her a role that demanded instincts forged in 3 a.m. breach calls and federal audits she'd never faced. Then Andrew turned to me. Oakley will transition into a consulting and support capacity. Consultant. The word hit like a dropped server rack. I'd be training her on systems that would collapse within days without me. He avoided my eyes as I asked, what exactly does that entail? His answer was corporate fluff. Documentation, metrics, onboarding. Translation. I was being erased from a framework I'd built from the ground up. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Natalie stood by the dashboard like it was a cipher she couldn't crack. Polite, eager, but lacking what we call infrastructure instinct. Andrew wrapped up with hollow praise. It's time for younger leadership. He didn't even look at me. People call this an organizational transition. I call it rewriting history to serve the author. As I walked out, one thought crystallized. An organization doesn't fear outside threats. It fears the internal fractures no one dares name, until the person who held it all together is gone. And I was that person. For 14 years, in a field where one misconfigured port can do more damage than a blizzard, I was the quiet force that kept everything standing. Starting back when I was just a network operations technician supporting banks, hospitals, and government contracts. The first time disaster loomed, a suspected breach of financial client data, I cross-referenced logs and traffic patterns to prove it was a false alarm. Had I not, we'd have falsely reported a breach and lost 6 major clients. No one thanked me. No one ever did. I remember the department supervisor at that time walking past my workstation as I analyzed the network traffic, taking my report and informing leadership he had identified the anomaly early. I nodded. I did not require recognition. I only required the system to function correctly. The second time, a backup server in our Portland facility experienced a 17-minute failure during a scheduled maintenance window. Nobody noticed except me. I monitored dozens of systems daily, but those 17 minutes made me motionless before the monitoring screens for my entire shift. When I realized the backup had not triggered properly, I manually restored the data, verified the integrity checks, and contacted the client before they discovered anything amiss. The backup was secured, validated, and ultimately confirmed complete. Nobody thanked me, but nobody faced lawsuits either. That sufficed for me. The third incident is one I cannot forget. The Federal Trade Commission prepared for an unannounced compliance inspection. If you have ever worked in regulated technology services, you understand an unannounced inspection feels like a tornado striking the building. Every document must be flawless. Every process must align perfectly with regulatory promises. I rewrote the entire security documentation in 4 days, restructured the access controls, and installed new monitoring protocols in locations nobody had ever bothered to examine. When the inspectors arrived, they stated our security infrastructure was among the most robust frameworks in the Pacific Northwest. Andrew accepted the recognition. He stood before leadership, beaming broadly as if he had personally configured every firewall rule by hand. I stood at the corridor's end with a cup of lukewarm coffee and thought, fresh paint over crumbling walls. It appears acceptable, but only temporarily. Beyond those incidents, the remaining 14 years were late nights when the network infrastructure experienced outages, unexpected audits at dawn, and calls from technicians stranded in snowstorms. Every incident was a small crack I had to seal. I was no hero. I was simply someone who refused to watch the work of an entire team collapse. Speaking of my team, they understood I contributed more than the company ever requested. They respected me quietly. On mornings when I arrived before everyone, they always had a mug of hot tea waiting at my desk. Nobody mentioned anything, but they understood. They knew who carried the burden of the system. Occasionally a junior technician would say softly, "If it were not for you, this operation would have shut down years ago." I would simply smile and respond, "It is the job." Their silence was not cowardice. It was fear of losing their positions, fear of change, fear of being labeled troublemakers. In family-controlled companies like this, everyone fears disrupting those in authority. Everyone knew Andrew valued praise and rejected criticism. Everyone knew. Nobody articulated it, not even me. Outside of work, my life centered on my father. He had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease. Like a machine that had lost its calibration, a piece of his motor control deteriorated each day. At night, I transitioned from checking server temperatures to checking the temperature of his evening meal. I tracked his medication schedules the same way I tracked at-risk systems. Andrew never knew. He only knew I requested to leave early on the final Thursdays of each month. He interpreted it as a weakness. I viewed it as a responsibility. I lived like that for 14 years. Cautious, quiet, always offstage. People observed the company expand and assumed it was the work of leadership. They never saw the midnight emails, the pre-dawn reports, or the crises I neutralized before they erupted. I was the one doing everything nobody saw and nobody remembered. But the Oakley from 14 years ago was not the Oakley standing in the room on promotion day. When I watched Natalie step onto the platform to accept the position that should have been mine, I knew my silence had ended. Not because I wanted to rebel, but because I finally saw the truth I had been pretending not to see for 14 years. A company can survive on silent workers, but it collapses under delusional leaders. I had concealed the truth for 14 years. The truth is that this infrastructure only worked because I was there. And when I stood up, the truth would speak for itself. I would not have to say a single word. I first met Natalie on a Wednesday morning, the kind of Seattle weather where the sky turns slate gray and the rain feels like it is trying to wash someone's responsibilities into Puget Sound. She walked into my office wearing a smile so genuine it made her brand new access badge look like an award. I had seen many young hires enter the infrastructure world, but Natalie was different. Not because of skill, but because everyone in the building looked at her with a quiet sort of expectation, as if the story had already been written, and the rest of us were only supporting characters. Natalie introduced herself with clean, rehearsed confidence. Her voice carried the kind of tone that makes people want to believe she knows exactly what she is doing. But confidence originates from only two places: experience or the illusions of youth. I was not ready to judge. Older workers should respect the journeys of younger ones, even when those journeys are rolled out on a velvet carpet. That morning, I spent over 90 minutes showing Natalie how to read system logs, network traffic reports, and the mandatory federal requirements for data security compliance. She nodded with determination, took precise notes, and even asked a few well-structured questions. Everything seemed fine until I asked her to analyze a firewall log from a client server that had just flagged suspicious activity. She stared at the screen for nearly 4 full minutes, like she was trying to decode a message with no cipher key. I did not laugh. I simply turned the screen toward me and explained each section. I never belittle anyone who is learning. I only suppressed the faintest knowing smile when Natalie exhaled like she had survived a near miss. So her confidence came from youth. I recognized it. I had been the same until the industry delivered lessons hard enough to show me exactly where reality hurts. In the weeks that followed, Natalie worked under my supervision. More accurately, I stood behind her more than I had with any other new hire. She had a solid theoretical foundation. I will grant her that. She understood terminology and knew how the system appeared on paper. She was diligent. But infrastructure does not operate on paper. It operates on sudden failures, delayed vendor deliveries, and server rooms that must be stabilized in 5 minutes before entire client networks collapse. Theory does not save anyone when the alarms start flashing. Once I asked her to handle a security alert from the Bellevue data center. Those alerts usually come from one of two causes: a false positive from overly sensitive detection rules or a genuine intrusion attempt. Natalie chose to draft an email to the security operations team with 3 carefully phrased questions. I had to intercept it because a few minutes of delay could cost us access to critical client data. I drove with her to the data center, resolved the issue in 8 minutes, and returned to the office just in time to find her still composing the fourth question. It was not her fault. No one had taught her the survival instincts of this industry. I understood that. What I did not understand was why Andrew believed she was ready for a role whose complexity he himself did not grasp. One afternoon, Andrew called me into his office. He sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression carrying the kind of confidence built on title rather than expertise. He told me to start handing over key procedures to Natalie, speaking casually as though asking me to select the coffee blend for tomorrow's meeting. I asked what I should hand over first. He said, "Whatever you think matters." I looked at him for 4 seconds and knew instantly he had no idea what my work actually included. Andrew continued talking about the future, fresh perspectives, youthful energy, and how we needed to be more innovative. Every word was light, yet every word carried a cold truth. The path had already been drawn. My role would shrink while Natalie's expanded in ways only a family connection could secure. Walking out of his office, I saw Natalie standing in the hallway holding a thin folder of documents. She smiled when she saw me, an honest smile. Nothing forced. It eased something inside me. Natalie was not the problem. The problem was the throne someone else had built for her. The next day I began handing over a few basic procedures, partly to follow instructions, partly to see what Andrew truly wanted. Natalie received everything with an effort I respected. But after 4 days the truth was undeniable. No matter how hard she worked, she could not lead a system she had never faced under real pressure. I continued training her patiently, adding small touches of dry humor to keep the air from tightening too much. She would laugh, though sometimes uncertain whether I was joking, but watching Andrew stroll through the office, glance at my workspace without stopping, then head straight to Natalie's desk with a satisfied look told me everything. The direction had been chosen long before. I was only being kept long enough to fill the gaps they had not patched yet. One evening as I shut down my workstation, Natalie asked me a small question. "Oakley, do you think I can really do this job?" I looked into her young eyes, the eyes of someone who still believes the world moves fairly. I did not lie, but I was not cruel. I said, "You will learn a great deal, and sometimes learning is not something you choose. It is something circumstances choose for you." She did not understand it yet, but she would. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The Seattle rain was still falling as it always does. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not part of their future, and I had begun to wonder whether it was time to start writing a future of my own. Some sentences are not meant for you to hear. Yet once you hear them, you can never return to who you were. I have overheard countless arguments between management and the infrastructure team over 14 years. But that evening, I only needed one sentence to feel something shift inside me, like ice cracking beneath my feet. That afternoon, Seattle was grayer than usual. I stayed late to finalize the quarterly security audit report, something Natalie still had not mastered. The building was nearly empty, lit only by the pale fluorescent glow spilling across the tile floors. I was heading toward the equipment storage room when I passed Andrew's office and heard his voice. It no longer carried its usual booming politeness. It was the quiet tone of a man saying something he did not want anyone else to know. Andrew was speaking to someone on the other end of a call, likely someone on the executive board. His voice was low, but every word was clear, as if the room had been designed to carry sound outward. "Oakley will cooperate. She needs the income for her father." I stopped. In the first second I thought I misheard. In the second I knew I had not. And in the third I understood I had crossed a threshold, the kind you cannot step back from once you realize you are on the other side. I do not know how long I stood outside his door. I only know this. What I felt was not anger. Anger is simple. What I felt was a quiet kind of breaking, like touching a wall you have leaned on your whole life and discovering it is hollow inside. Andrew kept talking. He said I would continue supporting, that I was reliable, that I was not the type to cause trouble. None of those lines was meant as praise. They were meant to box me into a role he believed I would remain in because I had a father to care for, bills to pay, and worries he thought were chains around my wrists. I stepped back from the door carefully, silently, without letting the tiles make a sound. I did not want him to know I heard. I did not want anyone to know I stood there. Silence is not weakness. Silence is data. And I have always lived by data. Back at my workstation I turned on the light. My desk was still organized. My notes are still pinned with system diagrams and audit schedules. Everything looked the same except for me. I sat down feeling my heartbeat remained steady. No shaking, no rush, just the clear understanding that I had been misjudged for too long. And the person misjudging me believed I would always bow my head. I did not sleep that night. I went home close to 11. My father was on the sofa staring at the blank television with his familiar tremor. I covered him with a blanket, placed my hand on his shoulder. His hand was cold but peaceful. I thought about all the years I fought to keep everything together so he lacked nothing, so my job never fell apart, so life did not collapse. I thought about what I had given and what I had received in return. I stayed awake until 4 in the morning, not to cry. I'm not that kind of person. I simply lay there staring at the ceiling. When the sun began to rise, I knew something with absolute clarity. For 14 years I had been the one who kept everything standing. Every time the infrastructure malfunctioned, every time systems showed warning signs, every time a new employee struggled, I was the one who stepped in. I held the system together through knowledge, through instinct, through calm. But in Andrew's eyes, all of that had turned into a leverage point. He mistook my silence for fear. He mistook my steadiness for submission. And he believed I would never leave. The truth is this. Once people think they hold a small flashlight over your life, they forget you carry an entire sun of your own. The second night, sleep still would not come. Not because of Andrew's sentence, but because clarity had begun falling into place like numbers aligned in perfect order. I had allowed myself to be treated as a component in his system. I had let others use my family responsibilities as a way to keep me still. I had let my loyalty be mistaken for obedience. By the third night I was no longer restless. I knew exactly what needed to happen. Not a threat, not a confrontation, only the decision to walk away from a place that no longer valued the presence that kept it alive. I wrote the first 2 lines of my resignation on a scrap of paper. Just 2 lines. Yet they made me lighter than I had felt in days. I will resign. I will step aside and let them see what they believe is stable. I folded the paper and placed it in my drawer. Tomorrow I will finish it and I would submit it. No one could stop it. No one could use my father as a reason to hold me down again. Some departures do not need tears. Some endings do not need announcements. They only need one deep moment of clarity where you realize you have closed a chapter others thought would trap you forever. And I knew this. The moment I walked out, the system I had held together would finally have to prove whether it could stand without me. I was not seeking revenge. I was simply standing up from a chair they thought I would never leave. I arrived at the office earlier than usual on Monday morning. Seattle was still trapped in fog and gray clouds curled above Lake Washington like someone else's unfinished night. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and reread the final line of the resignation letter I had written after 3 sleepless nights. No matter how many times I looked at it, the words stayed the same, calmer than I was. I did not change anything. 14 years of unseen work, uncredited effort, collapsed neatly into a letter not even 1 full page long. I printed it, slipped it into an envelope and placed it on my desk. Touching the edge of the paper felt like placing down a stone I had carried for far too long, simply because I once believed I had no other option. But this morning my shoulders felt lighter, so unfamiliar that I wondered if I had grown used to a weight that was never meant to stay. Andrew arrived later than usual. He walked down the hallway with the busy posture of someone who wants the world to think he is indispensable. I tapped lightly on his glass door. When he looked up, I handed him the envelope. He barely paid attention until he saw the lettering in the corner. His eyes blinked once, then again as if his mind had just received incorrect data. He opened it immediately, read quickly, then stared at me as though I had thrown a server rack at his face. "Clee, what is this?" His voice mixed faint seriousness with a hint of panic he tried to bury beneath performance. I answered as gently as discussing the weather. "I am resigning. I will hand everything over in 2 weeks." Andrew forced a smile. "Oakley, can we talk privately?" I nodded. He closed the door, pulled his chair closer and crossed his arms. His voice softened in a way that felt rehearsed. "I know last week may have been abrupt. I know you were disappointed about the position. But everything has a reason. I think you understand that." I replied calmly. "I understand perfectly." He flinched at the certainty in my tone. "Oakley, you are the backbone of this department," he said slowly, as if shaping each word to keep me in place. "If you leave now, you will only hurt yourself. You are caring for your father. I know things are not easy for you. Every line he spoke echoed the sentence I had overheard in the empty hallway. The same tone, the same confidence that I would obey because I needed the paycheck. I gave him a quiet smile. Income matters, Andrew, but not enough for me to trade away my self-respect. His expression shifted as quickly as flipping a switch. So you are really doing this? You are leaving because you did not get promoted. You call 14 years of being dismissed not being promoted. I answered without changing my breath. He froze for a moment. Then he tried another tactic. If you walk out like this, I cannot guarantee you a positive reference. Other companies will ask about you. Are you sure you want that? I stayed silent. That silence unsettled him more than any argument could. Oakley, you are making a serious mistake. I stood straight, hands resting lightly in front of me. No tension, no anger, no need to prove anything. I let him hear his own voice. After a few restless seconds, he added one more line, harsher. You think leaving will matter? You think this department needs you that much? You think you cannot be replaced? I looked him directly in the eye. Everyone can be replaced. Not everyone can carry the consequences. Andrew frowned. Oakley, I think you are threatening me. I shook my head. No, I am telling the truth. He inhaled sharply, then stood up suddenly. You have 2 weeks, but do not expect me to help you find another job. I nodded. I had never needed his help. When I stepped out of his office, Natalie was standing at the end of the hallway. Her face paled when she saw the envelope no longer in my hand. Oakley, did you? I nodded. Her eyes widened as if she had witnessed a live wire burn open. But you have not taught me the full infrastructure system, the quarterly audits. I am not, I said softly. I will hand everything over in 2 weeks. I will leave everything as clear as possible, but the rest you will have to learn on your own. Natalie swallowed hard. I did not think it would. I am sorry if I cut her off. You have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault. She looked down at her shoes, her hands twisting together. Looking at her, I saw a trace of myself from 14 years ago. Except for one difference. I climbed my way up. She had been lifted into a role she was never prepared for. I returned to my desk, sorted important documents, closed my laptop, and packed the small personal things I had kept for years without realizing how much they meant. A mug printed with the Space Needle. A tiny photo of my father back when his hands were still steady. A folder thick with handwritten notes on infrastructure failures I had fixed again and again. For some reason, placing them into a cardboard box brought no bitterness, only clarity, a clarity I had been avoiding. As I walked past the operations floor, a few employees looked at me as if wanting to speak, then remained quiet. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they did not dare to say it. Either way, they understood silence was the most honest farewell in a place like this. I stepped out of the building's front doors. No one chased me. No dramatic scenes. Only the hiss of a bus braking on the avenue and the cool Seattle mist cutting through my collar. I breathed deeply before stepping down the concrete stairs. I did not say goodbye. No one needed to hear it and I did not need to speak it. I left in silence. But I knew that silence would echo louder than any protest ever could because sometimes the loudest sound comes from the person who no longer stands there at all. The morning I left Seattle, the city was wrapped in a thin layer of fog like someone had thrown a soft scarf over it before dawn fully arrived. I pulled my suitcase down the concrete steps and looked back once. Nothing special, just a gray office building where I had stayed late so many nights that even the security guards knew my name. A place that had taken 14 years of my life. The flight to Denver was on time. I sat by the window, feeling the strange weightlessness of someone who has just stepped out of a house quietly burning. Not because I wanted it to burn, but because I knew I had done everything expected of a person who sees the flames early. Denver appeared beneath me like a sprawling grid of mountain-backed ambition. I stepped out of the airport and pulled my coat close. The cold here had its own personality. It did not hide. It did not negotiate. It hit your face straight on and reminded you that you were now in the Rockies. The interview room was on the 14th floor of a building facing the downtown skyline. The company was a national technology infrastructure provider. I had spoken with them the week before. When I walked in, the regional operations director, a woman named Eleanor, shook my hand. Her grip was firm, the grip of someone who makes difficult decisions as part of her morning routine. She led me into the conference room. Her first question was one I did not expect. Oakley, I reviewed your file, but I want to know why you chose to leave a place you stayed for 14 years. I did not answer immediately. I told her the truth, brief even. That sometimes your real value is not in the place you stayed the longest, but in the place that actually understands what you do. Eleanor smiled the way only women who know more than they say can smile. Some women need only 2 sentences to understand what story you are really telling. After the interview, she asked me to stay and speak with the infrastructure team. The questions they asked made one thing clear. They needed someone who knew the system from network architecture to federal compliance, not a name to decorate a staffing chart. Leaving the room, I had the feeling I had just stepped into a new life. As I walked down the hallway, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. 6 missed calls from the old office. Not Andrew, not Natalie, people I had worked with for many years. I did not answer. I already knew what had happened within hours of my disappearance from their operational map. By late afternoon, I received the first email from the Seattle technical team. The first line hit me instantly. Primary firewall showing irregular traffic patterns. I exhaled. The primary firewall was the most temperamental piece in the system. It always needed monitoring because its detection algorithms drifted when traffic volumes spiked unexpectedly. I had mentioned this for 4 years. No one documented it. I did. Another email arrived. The alert triggered 5 warnings, but no one responded to them. I could see it clearly. 5 small red notifications blinking like someone coughing in the corner while everyone pretends not to notice. The rest of the staff had always believed that was my job. I was the one who answered the alarms only I could hear. Less than an hour later, an email from Natalie arrived. Her first line trembled. Oakley, I need help with the compliance documentation for this morning's audit. I opened the attachment. She had misunderstood the entire certification framework. The access control logs and security baselines were wrong. If that file had been sent, the regulatory team would have called within minutes. I knew because I had taken those calls myself. I did not reply, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer belonged to that place. Around 5 in the afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from a federal compliance office. An FTC inspector is requesting additional security logs from the Seattle infrastructure for the week. I knew exactly what that meant. The FTC does not reach out because they are bored. They call when the data is wrong, when someone has reported an anomaly. A part of me wanted to send one line of guidance, but I did not. I remembered the night 4 days earlier when Andrew said I would obey because I needed income to care for my father. Silence has a strange gravity. It wasn't revenge. It was the end of a responsibility that had long outlived its place. As sunset spilled over the Rockies, I walked through downtown Denver, finally free of the invisible weight I'd carried for 14 years. I thought of Natalie, earnest, unprepared, now drowning in a role no textbook could ready her for. Andrew would never admit his mistake. I sat on a bench, silenced my phone, and watched the sky fade to violet. That first day without me in Seattle was louder than all my years there combined. My work never needed applause, only to be seen. I worried for the people, not the system. It had been built on one flawed assumption, that I'd always be there. Now that lie was unraveling. Within days, alerts lit up. Repeated security breaches, ignored warnings, misread dashboards. The FTC called. Client access froze. Healthcare partners pulled out. Trust evaporated, and with it the company's credibility. News outlets named nepotism. Andrew was suspended. Natalie, overwhelmed, retreated. I let the messages pile up like echoes from a harbor I'd already left. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. No midnight calls, no fires only I could put out. If the system collapsed, it wasn't because I broke it. It collapsed because I was no longer holding it together. Then weeks later, at a security conference in Portland, a quiet voice behind me, Oakley. I turned. Natalie stood there, thinner, her eyes stripped of that first-day confidence. She wore a simple gray blouse, hair tied back, no longer the polished image crafted for her, but someone who'd fallen and was trying to rise on her own. You're here for the conference? I asked. Yes. Helping with a workshop. I saw your name on the speaker list. Wasn't sure you'd come. Her voice trembled. Her hands shook when she set down her bag. No pretense there. After a pause, she exhaled. I'm sorry. Not the polite kind. The kind you say when you finally understand. She looked down. I thought a degree was enough. But the last 4 months, it's been like standing in front of an exploding machine. I didn't know how to stop it. I still don't. You weren't wrong, I said gently. This work demands time, mistakes, nights in server rooms until your hands forget the cold. Textbooks can't teach that. She gave a sad smile. My father's under investigation. The press is calling it nepotism. Everything collapsed at once. I know why you left, she added quietly. It wasn't about the title. It was because they treated you like you didn't matter. I heard the recording. He said you'd stay because of your father. I was ashamed. For you. For me. Are you okay? I asked. I don't know, but I will be. I'm starting over. A real internship. No favors. Just work. Before she stood, she said, your absence spoke louder than any action. They didn't replace you. They replaced you with the wrong person. Sometimes collapse is the lesson everyone needs, even my father. I nodded. You grew up, Natalie. That matters more than any title. After she left, my phone buzzed. A message from my father's care facility. He was stabilizing. Slight progress but real. For the first time in months, I breathed without bracing. Some encounters don't rewrite the past, but they close doors quietly. And that quiet, it's its own kind of healing. Denver gave me what Seattle never did. Respect earned, not assumed. Colleagues who documented flaws instead of hiding them. A workplace where my judgment was trusted, not dismissed as support for someone unready. I took my father on a drive through the foothills. He leaned his head on my shoulder, eyes clearer than they'd been in months. We watched hawks circle overhead, on their own schedule, answerable to no one. I don't feel triumphant about what happened in Seattle. Just calm. Real worth doesn't need validation. It rises on its own. I once feared leaving would empty me. But it was that place that had emptied me, treating 14 years of crisis prevention as routine. When Natalie apologized, I finally understood. Sometimes all it takes for a broken system to fall is for the one holding it up to step aside. From Denver, I look back at Seattle like an old road I finally turned away from, toward paths clearer, brighter, and mine alone. My journey isn't over. But now I walk it without asking permission, or letting anyone rename my worth. If this story resonates, you've likely lived some version of it too. At our age, we're not chasing noise. We're listening for truth. And sometimes truth speaks quietly, just loud enough for those who need to hear it.